Hey guys, Kevin here with Victory 4x4. Today we're going to be installing our skid system for the Lexus GX460 and 5th gen 4Runners. Alright, so the first step here is going to be basically to remove all of your factory skid plates. We're going to start with the front one here with these two 10mm bolts in the center clip, and then move on back to these 12mm bolts back here. You actually have two 12mm bolts tucked right up in here. Just like that, your front skid comes out of the way. Okay, so your next skid is just 4 more bolts back here. Again, those are going to be your factory 12mm bolt heads. And we'll start up here at the front. Okay, and then now that we got the first 2 skid plates out of the way, we're going to come back here and remove these factory crash bars. I'm going to be using a 17mm socket. Your factory bolts may be slightly smaller, but this vehicle actually has a lift kit installed already. And those are just going to be 3 bolts each, and they drop out of the way, along with a couple spacers that are in place on ours. All right, and to install the front skid here, you're also going to have to remove this plastic splash guard. It's going to be 3 10mm bolt heads right here on the front, and then the rear hardware was removed with the metal skid plate. Okay, and since we're installing all of the skids on this vehicle, we're going to have to move back here and remove these 2 crash bars as well, or brace bars. These are just 4 12mm bolts per bar. All right, so now we're going to begin installing the front skid. First step here is we're going to be sliding our washer plates in through this cross member. Since we're doing the full skid kit, we're actually going to be putting 2 in on each side, and then we're going to have to line them up with these holes. It'll be the 2 inside holes for the front skid, and then the 2 outside holes here for our mid skid. And those can be a little bit tricky to get lined up, but you just got to fish around in here a little bit, find them, line them up with your holes. There are access holes in the top that you can get your finger down in as well to make it a little easier. And once you have your plates lined up, you can go ahead and drop the nuts in from the top. It's a little bit helpful to drop or push a screwdriver up from the bottom, and then you can just slip your nut right down on the screwdriver and easily line it up with the hole. Like so, and now you're ready to begin installing the front skid. Okay, so at this point we're going to be installing our front engine skid. Since our vehicle is already equipped with a lift kit, we're going to be utilizing our diff drop bolt pack, which utilizes a longer bolt as well as a spacer for the front and a set of spacers for the rear. And those spacers are just going to go in place here on top of the skid plate between the skid and the cross member. So on the GX and the 4Runner, you'll be utilizing these 3/4 inch tall spacers in the front. Okay, and we'll leave those finger tight for now. In the rear, again using our diff drop bolt pack, we're just going to use these small spacer plates to go in between the skid plate and the cross member. And then we'll hand start our bolts back here. And those are going to be threading into the nuts that we placed in the cross member earlier. Then at this point, we're going to leave these loose since we'll be installing the mid skid as well. If you're only installing the front skid, you can just push this as far forward as possible and then tighten it down in place. All right, so at this point, we're going to begin installing our mid transmission skid. Since we will be installing the transfer case skid as well, you're going to go ahead and install this plate on top of the mid skid before you put it up in place. And it's just going to sit right here on the back. Okay, so again, utilizing the screwdriver trick that we used on the front skid, we got our nuts lined up in place in the cross member here. Since we're utilizing our diff drop bolt pack, we're going to be putting our spacers right here on top of the skid plate, just above your bolt holes. And then we can go ahead and line this up and start threading the bolts in by hand. So with a 13mm socket, I'm going to go ahead and start my rear bolts by hand into the factory bolt holes. All right, so we're going to go ahead and remove this bolt on the inside of your driver's side frame rail, utilizing a 12mm socket. All right, and then in preparation of install for our transfer case skid, we got to go ahead and remove this plastic clip on the inside of the passenger side frame rail to make room for our nut tab. And just discard that. That will not be going back in. All right, and once the plastic clip's removed, you can go ahead and install your right side nut tab through the same hole. Drop it down in, and then you're going to line it up with this bottom hole here. All right, and then on the driver's side, very similar to the passenger, we're going to be installing the nut tab through this existing hole in the frame rail, just behind this factory bracket, and lining up with this bottom hole, like so. All right, so now we're going to install the cross member, paying attention to our forward-facing arrow cut into the bottom. It's just going to slip up here between the two frame rails and just behind the bracket that we removed from the frame earlier. Start the bolts by hand. Okay, and then with our 5/16 Allen and our 13mm socket, we can go ahead and tighten that in place. Okay, and then now that we have the cross member in, we can go ahead and install the rear transfer case skid. I'm going to go ahead and start the rear button head bolts and nuts. The nuts will have to be placed by hand over top of the cross member. And with those started by hand, we can move to the front. Okay, and with my 5/16 Allen socket, I'm going to go ahead and install these into the plate that we installed with the transmission skid. Now that all those are started by hand, we can go through and tighten up all 3 skids. And lastly, we'll install our cover plate on the front skid. All right, and then using our 5/16 button head bolts and serrated flange nuts, we can go ahead and install the front cover plate. And then we'll snug those up with a 3/16 Allen. That's it for this install. If you guys have any questions, concerns, email us at info@victory4x4.com or give us a call at 269-459-8447.